I'm Jackie Norman. I'm a freelance writer of more than 20 years, I'm an author, and I'm also a writer, researcher and interviewer for the global animal rights non-profit organisation Vegan FTA. Before that, however, in a previous life, I also spent 18 years working on beef and predominantly dairy farms around New Zealand. It's kind of nerve-wracking coming up here today and speaking so publicly, but I'm hoping that by me speaking about my experiences and my years of knowledge, it will hopefully provide some insight and bridge a bit of a gap between vegans and farmers, in the hope that by understanding the farming mind and psyche, we can all become better advocates and liberate the animals sooner by working together rather than against each other so forcefully. It's important to remember that just as much as we would like to, the majority of us vegans have not lived our entire lives as vegans. Most farmers, if not all farmers, were not born farming, and we've all found our way into the industry in some way or another, and I was no different. In my case, I was growing up, I was 19 years old, and I was in a little village in Hampshire in the UK when I pulled a really classy move and ran off with the Kiwi barman from my local pub. I arrived in New Zealand, didn't know another soul in the world over there, and he was from a farming family, and so milking cows and that kind of thing was the only job that he'd ever known, and so I kind of went along with it and found myself living on my first clean green New Zealand dairy farm. And at the time, it was June when I arrived there, and it was very quiet on the farm. Everyone was really relaxed, and I spent my days getting to grips riding the motorbike, and there were cows grazing peacefully in the hills. And I thought, this is great. This is like old MacDonald. I got myself a new pair of gumboots, and the views were beautiful. The New Zealand countryside was wonderful. All those things that you read about, and that you see. And I thought, this is great. There is nothing more wholesome than this. And like I said, I was 19 at the time, and everybody else that I knew, that I'd met in New Zealand, was also farming, or all of us youngsters. It was a very desirable thing to do because it was very secure. The money was good, and you had that security. You could spend years climbing that farming ladder, and if you worked hard enough, then one of these days, us lowly little milkers would one day have farms of our own, and that was everybody's goal, pretty much everybody that I knew. And then July came, and with July came our first, my first calving season. And it was spring, pretty much midwinter, when the cows started calving. And then things changed. I didn't have a work permit. And so all of a sudden I wasn't part of the goings on with the guys that were around me. I was on my own a lot. There were some things that were exciting. I got to go out at midnight and again at 3 o'clock in the morning to check the cows to see if any of them were calving. And for me that was really, really exciting because, I got to witness the miracle of birth, and I'd be there with my little torch, and it was just wonderful seeing these beautiful babies being born and their mums washing them, and then I'd go back home to bed for a little while with the guys and feel really lucky to have witnessed that whole thing. But other things started changing around the house. My boss changed a lot. He became a permanently angry person. I would be trying to keep house, and he would come in from the farm and just literally start throwing furniture around the place. And I was terrified. Got to remember, I wasn't out of my teens yet. I was really scared. So I think, just kind of kept mum really and tried to mind my P's and Q's. So at the majority of the time I stayed at home. My first real experience with calves, however, came one afternoon when I was bored, as often happened at that time because everyone was always on the farm, and I walked down to meet the guys at the end of milking in the hope that I could get a ride home on the motorbike. And sitting in the middle of the concrete cow yard was this tiny, tiny little Jersey caramel coloured calf, tiniest thing you've ever seen. And it was the farm owner's job. He was feeding the calves back then. And I said to him, "Oh, can I feed this one, please? I'd never done anything like this before." And he said, "That one? Nah, I'm not going to worry about that one. I'll just knock it on the head after milking." I said, "Knock it on the head? What do you mean knock knock it on the head. He said, oh, it's not worth anything. Look at it, it's so small. I said, you can't do that. I was absolutely mortified. This creature was so tiny, so perfect and so beautiful. There was nothing wrong with it. So I said, please, can I buy her from you? Like anything, please. And he goes, oh, God, all right, whatever, no, I mean, let's face it, he was going to knock it on the head, but he still charged me $30 for this calf. Anyway, I willingly handed over $30 and I brought her home. And you got to remember, I didn't know anybody. So this calf became my friend. It was much like a dog, as we all know, calves are just bovine puppies. And she and I became inseparable. I called her Suki, and I taught her to feed. I mixed up milk powder for her every day, and I taught her to feed out of a bucket. And we'd sit in the sunshine together, and she'd be sitting down, and I'd be reading magazines or a book leaning up against her, and I'd brush her. And anyway, about 8 weeks later, the farmer, the owner who had sold it to me, looked down from his spot on the top of the hill and said, my God, look at that calf. She's beautiful. I said, I know. I was really proud. And, she was my everything. And he said, I'll buy her back. I'll give you $80 for her. I said, I'm not selling her for anything. And so I never did. And she actually went to live at my partner's parents' farm. And she lived there until she was 10 years old. And she died of natural causes, but there was no way I was letting him have her back. As the season went on, I learned how to milk cows myself, which I was kind of proud of. It wasn't something that anyone that I knew in the UK knew how to do. And by the end of the first year on the farm, I'd learnt enough so that my partner and I could move on to another farm, and this time I would be one half of that partnership, another step up the farming ladder, if you like. And this time I learnt a lot more. It was my job to feed and raise the calves single-handedly, and I also learnt how to milk 220 cows by myself. Where do you start? This is where it gets tricky, trying to explain all this stuff. So you've got the calves that you keep. These are calves which are the right breed. They're calves which are the right sex. So the calves who have got, the right breeding, the right sires, and female calves get kept the majority of the time, unless they're the wrong breed, but we won't go into that. You got your calves that you keep, and they are the ones, my calfie kindergarten, I got to look after them, to raise them big and strong. And then you had the bobby calves. And I'd seen the bobby calves, they're the ones that you see in pens by the side of the road, waiting for the truck to come and pick them up. And the difference between the bobby calves and the girl calves that you get to keep, or the big male calves that get to grow into big strong beefies, is that you don't get attached to the bobby calves. I learnt that quite early on. I was told in no uncertain terms, you don't get attached to these calves, because these are the calves that they don't get to live. And so I go into the shed every day, twice a day, and I never had them in my care for more than 2 or 3 days. Because they would get slaughtered at 4 days old. And I'm going to be honest here, because one of the things that happens a lot, they're supposed to be 4 days old when they go on that truck, but a lot of the time they're not. If they're big enough and if they've had a feed, sometimes they're only 1 day old. I've known 1 day old calves be put on the truck. 2 day old, 4... How are you supposed to tell, right? If a calf is 1 day old or 4 day old. But anyway, when I went to feed the bobbies, I would go and feed them the same. I would do my best not to look at them. They're just as beautiful as all the other calves, just as beautiful, some even more beautiful, and so tiny and so innocent. And I would just try not to look at them and try not to connect or bond or get attached with them too much, because I knew that I couldn't, because they would get put on the truck. And I remember seeing the twice a week, I would be up at my house trying to have breakfast, and I would see the truck come along the road, and the calves would get taken out of the pen and they'd get thrown in. And they did get thrown in. They're not supposed to. They're supposed to get put in the truck. But they didn't. I mean, these truck drivers, they have to lift hundreds and hundreds of calves on any one round. And so, you know, they're over it. By the time they get to you, they're over it, and they just hoof them in the back of the truck. And that was something I never, ever got used to. And as time went on, it just got harder. But, you know, I was told that's the way it was. And after a while, you come to believe that, you know. It's sad, it sucks, but that's the way it is. There are a few other things that I didn't understand. You know, I make new connections all the time, years down the track. You know, it's a well-known thing that anyone who's vegan knows that baby calves cry for their mothers, and mothers cry for their babies, and they will cry for days and days and days. They'll bellow, and they do that. With the calves, though, didn't make that connection. I know. But I didn't make that connection. You've got to remember, I was taught by men as well. And at that stage, I wasn't a mother either. And so I was taught that if the calves cried, it was because they were hungry. And so it was like, oh, well, I can fix that easy, you know. I just go and feed them, and then they'll be quiet. And, you know, often that was the case, because they were certainly much happier when they had full bellies. And so, but yeah, we didn't make that connection. Another thing that I really hated was taking the calves away from their mothers. That was another thing I never ever got used to. You know, the cows were always very distressed. It was my job to sit on the motorbike and drive. I had to be the one that would drive the calf in the crate, while the farmers walked behind with the cows, getting them to follow the calf. And when you got up to the barns, the calves would go one way, and the cows would be put into a barn, and the cows would go the other and be put into a paddock. And that was when they would just start bellowing for their calves. And, you know, I used to, I knew that the calves would be fine with me, because I loved them. You know, I sang to them, I patted them, I got into the pens with them. I spent heaps of time with my calves, you know, I kissed them. Seriously, I did. And so, you know, I was sort of saying, it's okay, mums, I'm going to look after your babies. And yeah, they were warm, they were dry, they were fed, and they got lots of kisses and lots of cuddles, but I didn't still make that connection that, you know, they were all going to the same fate as their mothers. Or, you know, there's no happy ending with dairying. There's no happy ending. Incidentally, I should probably bring up here that I was vegetarian pretty much the whole time I was farming. I made the connections early on. We used to have this steer. All my cows and calves had names. And the very first farm that I went on, there was a steer, this beautiful black Angus steer. And I called him Randall. I don't know why. He just looked like a Randall. Anyway, and we'd go and see him up the back of the farm, and he was up in the bush. And anyway, one day the boss said, oh, it's time for the steer to go in the freezer. And I said, what, Randall? And they said, Randall? Who's Randall? Anyway, yeah, there was Randall. And after that, I couldn't eat anybody that I knew. And so I'd made that connection that, you know, beef and meat results in death. But despite the bobbies and everything else, I didn't make the connection of dairy and death. Now you're probably watching this thinking, are you mental? Like, how can you not make that connection? Conditioning and years and everybody around me saying, this is how it is, this is how it is. And after a while, you might not like it, but you come to think that it's okay. But, as I said, I never thought that slaughtering 4 days old calves was okay. And I couldn't understand why we needed to take calves from their mothers. It seemed strange to me. Like, why was I giving them food from a plastic teat? The same stuff. But we were taking it from their mothers. But, of course, as I learned as the years went on, it all comes down to money. There are things which I'm haunted about to this day. I have flashbacks a lot. The worst thing that I ever remember, and I don't know, I think this is banned now. I think it's largely illegal. I know most vets refuse to do it, and with good reason. But anybody who's vegan and who understands, the slight bit of what happens in the farming industry knows that a cow's reproductive system is not her own. The worst practice that I ever saw was inducing, which, just like humans, means inducing cows to give birth early. And the reason for this is because if they take too long to calve, they're too late, well then the farmer doesn't get enough milk out of the cow as he possibly could, which is dreadfully inconvenient. So, and so that's what happens. You get a whole bunch of cows, they are injected. There's usually a course of 3 injections. And eventually they all start to give birth. And depending on how far along that pregnancy is, as to the likelihood of the calf surviving. Sometimes, very, very rarely they survive, but most of the time, if you were lucky, and this sounds awful, but believe me, if you were lucky, they were born dead. If they weren't, it was the farm worker's job to go and knock these premature calves on the head, put them out of their misery. It was hideous, absolutely hideous, and it was always the farm workers that had to do that stuff. It wasn't the farm owners. It's always the farm workers that get those jobs. And yeah, I remember one year in particular, there was 22, a premature calf, their hair hasn't grown fully yet, their immune system their little lungs aren't strong enough and that kind of thing. And you can see the mothers, they give birth to these calves and they wash them just like all the others, and they know something's wrong and they don't know what, and they're just desperately trying to coax their babies to stand up, and the babies are too weak, and there's just not a chance. It's not a chance. It's just the most hideous inhumanity I've ever seen. And anyway, my partner at the time, he had the job of putting these cows out of their misery, and he went into a paddock, and there was 22 of these premature calves that had been born that morning. And it's the closest I've ever seen him to being absolutely broken, I think. He came back and he said that they wouldn't die, because he had to hit them over the head. And he was just, pretty much in tears, just saying they wouldn't die. And he said, I'm never, ever doing that again. But you do, because every year there's different farms and different bosses, and you do what the boss gets you to do. And there are a lot of things that, as the years went on, I cried so many times. I cried over the bobbies every single time the truck came. I cried every time I had to put a dead calf on the back of the motorbike and take it down for picking up. I cried. I felt sorry for the cows. I thought many times that the life of a dairy cow is just so wretched, so wretched. Most of the time their tails are docked, so when it's the height of summer, they've got these beautiful long swishy tails, but we can't have those because, well, they get dirty, so you can't have a tail to swish the flies off with because, you might hit the farmer in the face when you're trying to milk them, or, they might get dirty, and that wouldn't be very good, would it? So you'd see these little wee stumps, and, they have to walk for miles every day, twice a day. There were a lot of things that I didn't like, but every single time I tried to speak out, I just got told tough. That's how it is. And there were some things like, you never knew what happened in calving season. It was so intense, and we would spend a lot of our time, the cows would be down. They would have things like calcium deficiency, magnesium deficiency, and so, you're running on adrenaline the whole time. And that would be one of the things I used to have to do. I got pretty good with a flutter valve and a needle, and you'd have these calcium, there'd be a cow, you'd go and milk the cows in the morning, and you'd have a cow that couldn't get up because she was lacking in calcium, so I'd get great at putting these needles in, and then she'd get up again, and I'd be like, yay, save the cow. But, on the one hand, you're saving these animals, but you're putting them in this situation in the first place by putting them through this huge, stressful environment and constantly just revving these animals, They're like machines just revving at full noise. It's only when you step away from these things that you can actually really, really see things for what they are. As I said, I tried everything to get out over the years. I had many schemes. I tried to buy boarding kennels because I was an animal lover. I wanted to buy boarding kennels. There were always some things that I wanted to do, some new venture, anything to get us out so that I didn't have to do that anymore, so that I didn't have to go through another bobby calf season, another calving. But I was always told, tough, this is how it is. This is how it is. This is the most secure way to make a living. This is the best way. It's the most wholesome way. I decided to become a activist thanks to Jessica Strathdy. She is a fellow New Zealander, and I learnt after I went vegan about how she had spoken out, and her situation was different to mine in that she was a mother, and she immediately made that connection between robbing mothers of their milk and their babies. And she very quickly realized that she could not do that and be a mother herself, and have that be a part of that industry, doing that to other females of a different species. And fortunately her partner was very supportive, and they left the industry, and Jess started speaking out about it. And somebody else, I think it was in a vegan group, I joined a lot of vegan groups, and somebody said, oh, you need to talk to Jess, you're an ex-farmer, you've got to talk to Jess. And she said to me, as soon as we got connected, you've got to do something. You've got to use your voice, you've got to do something, you've got to speak out. You've got the voice of experience, you're the only other person I know like me, we've got to stick together. So having once been deeply entrenched in the farming industry and now at the polar opposite end of it, I guess you could say I'm in a pretty unique position in that I have a fairly deep understanding of both sides, that of the vegan activist and that of the farmers. And I realized that I need to use this voice in helping to create change and start effective conversations, because not everyone has the same perspective as me. And even if you don't, we still need to all be trying to at least attempt to understand the farming mind and the farmer's psyche. For example, when I went vegan, I still have a lot of friends who are in the industry, and although I really don't like what they do anymore, and I wish that they didn't do it, we are all on different journeys, and you can't force anybody to be on the same journey as you at the same time. So while I wish that they were in a different profession, me going up and saying, I didn't realize before, but we're actually all awful and we need to stop, and you're awful and you need to stop, that's not going to, the defenses are just going to go up. And another way that if you want a surefire way of blocking any chance you have of decent conversation, it is by saying that, farmers don't love or have any care for their animals. Now, a lot of vegans will be rolling their eyes and be like, well, of course they don't. I'm living proof that farmers do love their animals. When I was milking them and singing away and thinking that this was such a wonderful, wholesome thing to be doing, I did not realize that I was stealing from them, that I was stealing milk that was meant for their babies. And, you just don't get that connection of how inherently cruel and how wrong it all is. Another example I can think of is a friend who recently, she did a post on Facebook, she's still farming, and she was talking about how she just had to send 2 of her favorite old cows to the works, and that she was crying and that she was sort of embarrassed, saying, oh, farming sucks, I wish it didn't have to be that way, I didn't want the truck driver to see me crying. And so again, that care is there, there's some little trigger in your brain, even though you're really deeply entrenched like this lady is, that there is something quite wrong and very sad, but you just don't make that connection. You don't think past, put them in the yard, truck comes and picks them up, end of story. You don't think about where they're going. The works, which is the slaughterhouse, when farmers refer to the works, it's just a word, it's an expression. And you just don't think about it. I didn't know really what happened at a slaughterhouse until fairly recently. It was something I guess I didn't want to see, like a lot of people, and I figured, well, I'm already vegan, I don't need to see that stuff. And I was actually writing an article about a girl who went vegan after she witnessed what happened in a slaughterhouse for a school project. And I saw one of the less graphic images that she took, and I couldn't speak for 3 days. I literally could not function for 3 days, and that image just haunts me. It was a halal slaughterhouse, so the cows their throats are slit, and it stops me from sleeping, actually, to be quite frank. And I don't know if that image will ever leave me. And that's just one. I didn't see the process. I didn't set foot inside. It's like Paul McCartney said, if slaughterhouses had glass walls, nobody would be doing this. And I think all the farmers that send Doris and Mabel and all their old girls off in the truck and give them a pat and say, oh, you're a good girl, you did well. If they really knew what happened to them and the complete lack of humanity and respect that happened to those animals when they reach the other end, I think there would be very, very few left in the industry, to be quite honest. There are some very high profile cases in the media at the moment. There is a New Zealand share milker who has been recently stripped of his award by enlightening people on some of the farming practices, which, farming hacks, if you want to call it, to trick cows into letting down their milk. And I can vouch, I know that does happen, and there are also other practices that achieve the same goal, which I won't talk about. But yeah, it definitely happens. And we've also seen some high profile cases of farmers beating their cows, which also happens. I've witnessed it. It's horrible. There is no need for it. Cows are beautiful, gentle, docile creatures who just do not deserve any of that kind of treatment. But you've got to remember that these are high profile cases and they need to be out there. But it's like you can't tar a whole profession with the same brush. It's like saying all policemen are corrupt. We don't know every single person, and we haven't seen everybody at work in that profession. We are all individuals, and we're all part of a very horribly flawed system. I've got one of my favorite sayings is that tradition is peer pressure from dead people. And this is what the farming industry is to my mind. It's something that we've all been deeply entrenched in, that it's been handed down. And at some stage, at some point in time, somebody decided that this was okay. And now we're just so conditioned in it that it's very, very hard for a lot of us to break out. Another reason that it's not a good idea to say that all farmers don't care about their animals, and especially being female, I can vouch for this, is that a lot of women take a huge pride in rearing beautiful calves. Again, we don't make that connection that, the cow would do a much better job, but we take pride. It's calf rearing on dairy farms is very female dominated. I guess it goes to that old, maternal instinct that women will look after the babies better. So, a lot of women take great pride in that, and they will take it hugely offended, a huge personal affront if you try and tell them that they don't care about their animals, because there are a lot of people out there that were like me and that do, love petting these babies. And so, it's really not a tactic that I recommend. I know it's really hard not to say those things and not to think those things, but there are better ways that we can go about creating conversations with farmers. One of these things that I would recommend is that, it's human nature. We all go into veganism for different ways. Some people just make connections with the animals straight away. Others kind of meander into veganism through a health avenue or through an environmental avenue. And, we're all vegan for the animals in the end, the more that we learn. But at the start, particularly if you're going into it for health reasons to start with, it's human nature that people, they want to know what's in it for me. What do I get out of this? We always say with getting people to go vegan, it's not a competition. We don't have a chalkboard saying, yes, converted another one. There's nothing in it personally for us. The wins are for the animals, it's for the planet. We don't get anything personally out of it. But, if that's what works at getting through to farmers, for example, I'm trying to give you some of an idea of what farmers do deal with. I mean, it is such an intense profession, and everything is go the whole time, and farmers are very, very focused on the goal. And looking back, you're so focused on the goal, on what you have to do, and by the goal I'm talking about milk production. That is the goal. You've got to please the boss. You have to try and beat last year's figure of however many kilos of milk solids you did, however many kilos, you've got to beat the person that was there the year before you. And if you don't beat what they achieved, you're constantly being questioned by the boss. Why? What are you doing differently? Why isn't this happening? Why isn't that happening? What are you doing wrong? And so just day to day, you're constantly sort of under pressure from the boss. You're under pressure to meet this goal, and it's kind of like you're on autopilot all the time because you're just getting through each day. I remember I completely lost my 20s. It's just a blur, and most of my 30s as well. And just simple things, one of my biggest memories of farming was eating fish finger sandwiches in the bath. That was my dinner. And I knew that I'd just get in and then I'd have to go out and check the cows at midnight again, or you just never knew what was going to happen. You just never switch off. And so I had to eat fish finger sandwiches in the bath because I didn't have time to cook a decent meal and to clean up at the same time. So this is what farmers, the pressure is constant, and you don't only get the pressure from your boss and the invisible people that were on the farm before you, because farming jobs change from year to year a lot of the time. It's also the peers, other farmers, because you don't really see anybody else. You only see people in your profession. And I remember going to discussion groups once a month, and you'd take it in turns, and other farmers would go to somebody else's farm, and it's all comparison. It's all very competitive. It wasn't about building people up and saying, oh, you should be doing this, or just imagine if you did that, or you're doing this well. It was always like, oh, well, he hasn't got much grass, has he? Or look at God, his cows aren't, they're not looking the best. And it's very competitive. This combined with ridiculous working hours, that is what results in bosses like mine, coming home and throwing furniture around. It's not a good place. So, and it's not until you get out of that industry and that you're not doing that anymore, and you're not getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning anymore, and that you realize how different life could be and what you've been missing on all these years. And so that is the kind of thing that we want to get through to farmers. It's a bit of here in New Zealand, it's a bit of a thing between the dairy farmers and the beef farmers. It's always, dairy farmers are so much more harder working than beef farmers, because, beef farmers don't have to get up early in the morning. They don't have the stress, all they do is just put their animals in a field and just leave them and let them grow fat. It's the dairy farmers that do all the work. And imagine the difference between dairy farming and beef farming. Imagine if you were growing plants instead, and how peaceful that would be, and how wonderful that would be. Just not to have that stress anymore. I remember years ago, a farmer friend of ours, a group of us all went to the beach one summer, and I was out of the industry by then. But everybody was surfing in the water, and there was him and his eldest daughter, and they were having a great time in the water. They were surfing together, and so the rest of us came up and just chilled on the sand. And he came up about an hour later, and he said, "That was brilliant." He said, "I think that's the most time I've ever spent with my daughter one-on-one like that." And she was 12 years old, and so you lose so much family time, and if you change the way you farm, we need to encourage farmers. This is what you will gain. You will get your life back. You will get your mental health back. You will get your family time back. You'll have the time to go and pick your kids up from school and watch them playing sports and all the things that when you're entrenched in dairy farming, you are robbed of. So that's one great thing. And like the mental health, we all know about the dreadful mental health statistics with farmers and the high suicides. And this is something that doesn't need to happen if we just remove that stress. And it also doesn't help with having people like the vegan community saying they are evil, they are psychos, they are bad people, their industry is dying, and the media also, painting all farmers to be these horrendous evil people. That doesn't help. So we need to start using a bit more compassion as well, and just helping farmers ease into a different kind of farming. We need to make them see how important they still are, because for generations they've had this vision that they are essential, they are the backbone of our nations, of our countries, and that they are doing a really, really important job in feeding us. And so they still can do that, and we need to make them see that we need farmers now more than ever, but we need them to grow plants, because look at everything that's happening with COVID, and the pandemics, and eating animals is not helping with that. If we don't do something soon, we're going to get to a stage in the planet that it's all going to be taken out of our hands. We're not going to have a choice anymore. But if we make these choices and encourage farmers to grow plants, and lots of different plants, the more diversity of plants that we can eat and that they can grow for us to eat, the more resilience we will have against these pandemics. And so they are vital, and it's really vital for all of us that we help steer them in this direction as well, and show them what they can grow. And so I think that's one of the stumbling blocks that we also have as vegan activists, is that we tell farmers that, you need to stop what you're doing. It's bad, it's evil, it's a bad person, it's cruel, and, you've got to stop right now. But then when they say, well, what do you want me to do? We don't have the solutions, because, we don't know their land or their soil or what they can grow. So, for us to have decent conversations with them and help that little flicker go on in their head of what else they could be doing, we need to educate ourselves better as well. There are farming conferences all the time. There are farming events where there are people out there who are trying to educate farmers into different things that they can grow now. And, we as vegans should be attending those as well, because by us becoming educated and knowing, our own farming area and what can be grown, we can help farmers as well. So rather than say, oh, you shouldn't be doing that, this is bad, we can say, hey, have you seen what's happening with people growing oats over here? And, are we in a suitable area here where, look at the demand for this, look at the cost of this. Because that's another thing that people don't realize as well. People think that farmers are raking money in, that they're all sitting on this gold mine. Every farmer I've ever known is in debt, big debt. I've known farmers who are $4 million in debt to the bank before they've even been 40, So that is a kind of way that we can get through to them, is that, there is a huge demand for oats or for hemp or for pea protein, and really learn about the land in our area so that we can talk to farmers in our areas and say, well, look, yeah, this would be the perfect land for this. And, why don't you have a look into it and just see for yourself how much demand there is. And this is the way of the future. And you can be a part of that. Get them excited about thinking about what their land can do, what their soil can do. And, there are people out there doing wonderful things. There are organisations such as Kiss the Ground, which is great to look into. They are, helping farmers transition and showing what can be done. Show them success stories of farmers who have successfully transitioned and the difference in the life that they're having now. And, the stress and the fact that, you can make ends meet and actually do quite well by growing peas instead of cows. Encourage your government to put their money towards helping create change rather than creating one problem after the next. I was absolutely gobsmacked to hear that in New Zealand, the government pays farmers, I think it's $40 million a year of taxpayers' money for them not to pollute Lake Taupo. That's huge money, huge money. Imagine what better use that could be put to in feeding us in a way that is healthy and sustainable rather than just dragging everything down and having this inherent cruelty. So, get in touch with the government and encourage them to use these subsidies in different ways to help and create change and not just creating one problem after the next. Also, do your research with media. I've mentioned that there's a couple of high-profile stories at the moment, and I think we all know as vegans that when we read the news, for every positive story we see that makes us go, yay, vegans are, we're winning, we're taking over the world, this is happening. The next day there is another negative one saying, oh, vegan children are malnourished and all of this kind of stuff. So you've got to take it with a pinch of salt, and you can't take everything at face value. Do your work and educate yourself, because farmers can't do it all on their own. They're already under enough pressure. They really need our help. And so I hope that some of these tips are helpful. Remember, a lot of the media hype as well is creating this war between vegans and activists. We're like this, and it doesn't have to be that. I saw photos yesterday of a media story where there was a farmer fronting up against a vegan activist in the supermarket, and so much of this is caused by media hype. And it's not fair. It's not fair on either parties. We need to be talking together, not butting heads. I want to finish with a quote from a friend of mine who is a wonderful activist, fantastic, very compassionate, and a real example. I think he is fantastic. His name's Bobby Sudd, and he is an event organizer for LA Animal Save. And he wrote these words to me yesterday, and it was perfect timing because I really want to share what he has to say. He says, "We must have compassion and understanding for all. I think we need to be mindful and remember the shifting consciousness that occurred in all of us when we first became vegans. It was an awakening, one which allowed our compassion and love to grow beyond what we had known before. It's not that we didn't love animals before we were vegan. We just lacked the awareness and understanding necessary for greater love. If the vegan ethic teaches us anything, it should be that love, kindness, and compassion are not finite, and therefore have no need for rationing. The self-righteousness usually comes from the recently converted. It only hurts us because it comes from a place of hate, not love. We cannot hate our way into any solution." I hope my ramble, my emotions, my memories, and hopefully some of my solutions provide a little food for thought and you find helpful. And thank you so much for listening.